Hello and welcome to a special edition of On Target, your go-to podcast specifically designed for software sales leaders. Today we're switching gears a bit. We've had over 40 insightful interviews with some of the industry's most successful sales leaders, and now we're distilling the very best of these conversations into a powerful 10-minute episode for the next couple of weeks. We'll be exploring the highlights, key insights, and innovative strategies shared by these experts, so gear up for an exciting journey through the very best moments of On Target. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get started.
One of the things that I really care about is understanding how things work and how you can improve them. So I look back on some of the early sales jobs in my career, and I remember thinking, like, this can't be the best way of approaching this. This can't be the best way of trying to establish value and establish fit with customers. And I guess that was the start of the journey. I see enablement in kind of two categories. One of them is like data and tooling. So it's harnessing data from the entire team and all of the inputs that the team have, and translating that data into actionable insights. So I don't know if you're a sci-fi guy at all, Alex, but there's a concept in sci-fi of like a hive mind. And I think of sales enablement from that perspective, almost like the hive minds. Like their job is to curate the inputs from the team and then make sure that we are learning as a unit, as a hive, so that if there's a really important learning someone has in a discovery call or in a competitive bake-off, we all benefit from that learning, and we're not acting as individual actors. So that's the first side of it. And then the second side is, I guess it's more cultural. It's about creating a safe space for people, so there's no fear of reprimands if something doesn't go well, right? So that sort of no blame culture, and it's sharing the losses as much as we share the wins, and doing deep dive retros together as a team where we lose, despite it being painful. I try not to rub salt in the wounds immediately after we've lost a deal, but it's important that we learn from those losses and those failures together. If you create that environment, then and make learning and development a priority for people, not just within the context of their current employment, but like them as a professional, I think you really get the best out of people, because it shows that you care about them. They will move on at some point. You're ambitious, and your best people, there's always going to be a time when they look to spread their wings and do something else, and then that's fine. I just want them to do as much as they can while they're here.
This premise of shared responsibility seems to just be quite thematic in a lot of what you talk about. And I think that's an interesting takeaway for people to consider, right? Winning as a team, losing as a team, learning as a team, growing as a collective. All of these things can be really important when you're trying to build and foster a culture where people feel that they're unified in pursuit towards some form of a goal or some form of a target. We talk so much about value selling, and I think in a way in this era the words start to become undercooked or underappreciated, because we just hear it all the time, right? Sell on value, but it is just so incredibly important. We're in the business of solving large scale problems and driving transformative value. And when you really understand those two things, and you get your head out the trees in terms of focusing on features, functions, and a transactional way of looking at a deal, it really does make the difference. And I still think that holistically sellers have such a long way to go, right, to really start to shift that mindset. And in a ever increasing competitive landscape for a large proportion of businesses, certainly with the economic downturn and more, we've all got to raise the bar, right? We've all got to start to get really clear and comfortable about what it takes to be a great seller, and being able to sell on value, and being in scenarios where actually you're winning business when you cost more than your competitor is great validation of doing a tremendous job in terms of helping a customer to understand.
And you've got to work out what works for you and your personality, because if you try to force a leadership style onto yourself, which doesn't suit your personality type, it's going to come across awkward. You're going to feel crap about yourself. So I did a load of research on it, and I spoke to some role models, and they passed this advice on to me. And the leadership style I landed on was servant leadership, because it's kind of the thing that suited my personality the best. It's not going to be for everybody, but I think do your research. Obviously, you know what you're like, and then pick a style that's gonna suit you.
From your time in the Navy, right, and I can hear in your voice there's a lot of passion when you talk about building teams, and I can only assume building culture and all of these types of things that go into that. You must have spent a lot of time thinking these things through and really getting specific around what's important. So just talk to us about some of the core pillars of really building, sustaining and scaling best in class sales teams.
Yeah, I would say, it's probably more complex than this, but I'm a big fan of keeping things simple. There's two things that have to be true at the core when you're building a team. So one is trust, right? There's a book that I think most have read called 5 Dysfunction of a Team. And that's this whole concept of at the base of this pyramid has to be trust. And so one of the ways in which you build trust is by doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it, right? It's holding yourself and people accountable. It's creating an environment where people feel safe to ask for feedback, to push each other, to challenge each other. So that's one is trust. The second is just having very clear expectations of what good looks like. There are a lot of people out there, Alex, I'm sure you've seen this, who are working really hard, who have their motivations are in the right place. They're showing up early. They're staying late. They are doing everything, but they're still not getting to where they want to be, or getting the end of year reviews they want, or the promotions they think they expect. And often, in my experience, that's just a result of not clearly understanding what great looks like to whoever it is they're reporting into. So if you have trust and you have clear definitions of what good looks like, that to me is truly the foundation of building a high performing team.
It was really interesting there. I'd be curious to unpack how much of that you really took from your days as a veteran. Were these some of the core principles that really underpin what it took to be a great team member or a member of your cohort while you were in the as a veteran? Or have things changed? Did you have to evolve your way of thinking to then unpack the fact that those are the two staple ingredients?
Yeah, I would say, the trust, certainly I learned that in the military, right? So for example, I'm going to butcher this concept, but there's this concept of leadership. You can get it from experience, you can get it from title, and there's like 3 or 4 different types of quote unquote leadership. And in the military, there are people who you will find yourself reporting into who inspire you. You follow them because they're just great at what they do. You know their interests or your interests are theirs as well, right? There's an alignment to a North Star. And occasionally you'll find someone, typically a more junior leader, who relies on their title, their rank, to get people to do what they want to do. And while at the end of the day, they might result in the jobs getting done, there is far more camaraderie and long-term sustainable camaraderie if the leader is leading through experience and they're doing it with their team, as opposed to telling their team what to do and just relying on their rank or their title. So having been exposed to both of those mindsets, certainly, right? One stood out as what I don't want to be, and one is what I absolutely want to aspire to be.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. There's this saying, which I'm sure you've heard, Carl, and many others out there would have, which is just leading from the front. And what that often means to me is that having that willingness to be in the trenches when and where necessary, because, once you become a leader, sometimes for some people, it means they think they can be on the sidelines call out orders. And to your point, because you got a fancy job title, that warrants people having to take action and do what they're told. But absolutely, that doesn't warrant those things, right? Being able to be in the trenches, you get a unique perspective on what's truly going on the front line. You spend time with customers, you spend time with your team. To your point, you earn respect, and it gives you much more diversity of perspective because you've been privy to seeing many more battles that you can then take forward to help to empower your team moving forward.
You can build the waterfall, you can have accountability. But what I have never seen happen in my many years of selling and leading sales is that what plan you establish at the beginning of the year or the quarter or even the month actually goes perfectly to plan. So yes, you want to hold people accountable, but what's even more important than that is when you inevitably have to adjust, right? What does that conversation look like? In a high performing team, it's typically starting with data. Hey, what are we seeing in the numbers? And I'll use an analogy. I'll use football, the American style football here. You might go in with a game plan where you're going to be a run heavy offense. But you find out that, you're just not making any headway. But you think they've got an injured corner or a weak second line defense. And so you're going to start airing it out in the second half, right? You start to realize that whatever demand gen strategy you had in place, the yield isn't what was expected, but we're seeing maybe a higher yield on in-person events. So let's pivot some of our energy and money from, demand gen, the traditional, SEO, we'll use that category. And we're going to sponsor a few more events. We're going to pay to send more people to some conferences, right? You want to make sure that when you're holding people accountable, once you've identified the problem, you're working as a team to say, great, well, where are we overperforming and how can we double down on that?
I do like the way that you spoke a bit about leveraging data, right? And using that intently. I've certainly found, we also run weekly pipeline reviews and, being able to look into that data is obviously incredibly important, but it's really being thoughtful about the insights that data is actually deriving, and then how do we make measurable change and drive action off the back of that data. So I think what it sounds like you guys are doing particularly well is combining data accountability and actually taking action to really set yourselves up for success as you move forward.
There's 5 attributes ultimately, and I do focus on attributes, less so on experience in a particular segment or industry or how many years they've been doing something, right? Like at the end of the day, you could have 10 years of experience of underperformance. I don't see why that makes you any more qualified or hungry than someone who's just getting started. And if I'm even halfway decent at my job, or my team of leaders is halfway decent at their job, right? We'll teach you the skills, right? But what I can't coach is the will. And so I focus a lot more on the attributes, and there's 5 big ones. The first one is ownership mentality. I am looking for individuals who look at everything in life as happening through them, not to them. That to me is a very important distinction. And there's a lot of, sayings and motivational posters out there around it's not what happens to you, it's how you react. But there's so much wisdom in that. And there really are 2 types of people, right? It's those who life is just happening to them, and those where it's happening through them. And I think that is one of the first things I'm looking for. So ownership mentality. Second is coachability. To what I had just said earlier, Alex, I know that if someone is open to coaching, and even better than open to it, they have examples of proactively seeking coaching out. I know they'll get the coaching from myself, for my team, because the first thing I tell all of the frontline leaders that I hire is their number one job, if nothing else, is to coach their team. I will never get upset if a project is delayed or something else that's administrative or ancillary to their primary responsibility suffers because they are over-indexing on just coaching their team. So ownership mentality, coachability. Next is high EQ. In sales, you have to be able to read the room. You have to be able to understand what's being said, what isn't being said, look at the nonverbal communications, have empathy, have curiosity. There are some people, right, where EQ, the best sellers I've ever worked with, they just had an innate ability to connect with people, understand people, and read the room and pivot as needed. And if you don't have EQ, right, you could be really talented and work really hard, but you might be missing some really important moments that have a pivotal impact on your deal. The fourth one, Alex, is work ethic. As I said earlier, right, I can teach skill. I can't teach will. You either want this or you don't. So I'm looking for people who can give examples of, times when they went above and beyond, and times where they've had to make hard choices of what they weren't going to prioritize so they could go all in on their number one, priority. And then last but not least is collaboration. So I've seen high performing lone wolves, and not to say that there's not a place for individuals like that on a team, but if you have a group of individuals who genuinely want to see the team do well, not just themselves, regardless of what the hell's happening around them, but their team do well, and they're sharing what didn't work, they're sharing what did work, they're coaching their peers, they're jumping in and helping them out on demos or stepping in when they're running late on a call, that is a massive difference maker when it comes to culture. So that would be the fifth attribute that I'm looking for in a seller.
I'd love to learn a bit more about some of the core principles that you feel are really important for sales leaders and sellers alike to really adhere to when it comes to actually winning business. Any thoughts on that?
Oh man, that's a big topic. I would say, all right, if I had to pick one thing in what could be, right, many, it is a great discovery mindset, not a discovery stage, right? Discovery frameworks, there's billions of them, but a discovery mindset. If you are genuinely curious about what is going on in your customer's world and what they care about, you already are probably in the top 20% of sellers out there, right? You need to understand your ICP. You need to understand, more importantly, the personas that you're selling to within that ICP. And you need to understand, like, what are the metrics, the projects, the company-wide goals they're responsible to. And you need to understand it intimately. Because if you don't, then you're just spraying and praying. And the sooner that you can intimately understand those things, the much more likely you are to have a compelling message when you're trying to just get them to engage with you. The much more likely you are to deliver a really bespoke value add, like illustrative vision of what better could look like during your demo. And the more likely you are to actually get the budget from the CFO who doesn't necessarily care about those things.
I'll put another one into the mix for the leaders listening out there. It's really to have conviction in everything that you do. I mean, there's a tremendous difference when you're going into a first meeting and anything beyond, and just being in cruise control when you're talking through with the customer about learning about their situation and how you think you can help. Have conviction. If you're working for a company, you've got to be working there for a reason. You've got to have some form of belief in the transformation that you can drive for that organization. Believe it. And if you combine that with having that discovery-based mindset all the way through, you're in a really powerful position to first seek to understand and then to be able to prescribe once you've understood how you can be helpful. But when you prescribe, do it with conviction, and it will make a tremendous difference to up-leveling your team. When you think of building and scaling sustainable sales teams, how important do you feel that enablement around the technology and the product is to actually build a team that can be effective out there in the field?
I think it's a really great question. And if you think about the deals that you've done over the course of your career, the deals that you probably feel the most proud about is when that you had this connection with this customer and you were able to get them to see the vision of the product that you were selling. And oftentimes, I think that is really occurs when you understand the value proposition of the product that you're selling. And if you unpack what does that really mean, it is sweating the details like you described. It's actually going through and understanding why a developer API is going to be applicable to that developer building the next generation tool. Or, if it's selling a database or selling switching and routing, it's really understanding the use cases. It's understanding the details, what drives the business outcome that, these people are now going to buy your service or your product. What is really going to happen to them by doing that? And when you're able to tie those things together, you make probably the strongest arguments, and you're able to make it resonate with the customer in a way that the other competitors are not able to do. And so I think it is sweating the details. And I think, understanding that value prop is probably one of the most important details that you can really learn when selling. I think there are three things that you have to do. The first is cultural, and I think that's the most important piece. And so instilling the culture within the team of being a solution seller, being someone that can actually articulate value and be very consultative in their sale, is a pretty critical component that you need to instill within the team. I think the second piece that people need to do tactically is they really need to spend a little bit more time on enablement. So the sales enablement component of your sales team, when you're doing this at scale, you need to make sure that everybody is singing from the same playbook or the same songbook. And you need to be able to make sure that the enablement is at a level of detail that is commensurate to where you want the team to be. So it cannot be surface level, just give me your pitch. Like, it's got to go deeper into use case and value prop and business outcome and really what the mentality of the ICP is. And when you get to that level of detail in the enablement, usually this starts to percolate up into the way that you sell. And then I think lastly, it's really just the operational discipline around, how you actually drive a team. So when you're driving a team, oftentimes when you get people to stand and deliver like they would do in a sales meeting, you get to probe and ask more questions that really forces them to think about the value prop, really think about the details of the customer, really think about the outcomes they're trying to drive, and not be very surface level. And people sometimes would shy away, but of kind of really pressure testing it inside these teams. But oftentimes the best sales teams, when they have that leader that really is pressure testing it, it starts to translate into a very sort of technical, solution-oriented, consultative sales team versus the teams that are very transactional.
I love those three. And on that point of pressure testing, something that, I'd been experimenting with my team that's had great success is just off the back of sales enablement is actually doing role plays for things such as demos, right? And trying to certify the proficiency of your team actually being able to carry both a technical message, but also relaying some of the core tenets of things that a rep has understood through their discovery, and making sure that they continue to tie back the technical added value of the service or solution also into the business benefits that they might have unpacked during a discovery meeting. So again, a lot of this comes back to that sweating the detail, but also taking enablement programs to the next level to make sure, to your point, that we're pressure testing these things as well.
What I have found, oftentimes it's the sales leader or the salesperson that has a bit of a chip on their shoulder. They have something to prove. They really want to strive for excellence. They want to get to the next level. If you can sense that in an individual, plus you can also see that they're willing to take feedback, take direction, and they're willing to kind of follow the process that you have set forth, usually those are the salespeople that you see at club. Usually those are the salespeople that you're seeing up at the end of the year and getting the sales award. And so those individuals, I think it's the grit, it's the chip on your shoulder, wanting to go out and prove something and really go out after something with the combination of the details, the operational details that you described earlier. It's that intersection that I oftentimes find really great salespeople. Those are the individuals that will really connect with their customers in a way that most people do not, and they'll treat them much more of a longer relationship than a transaction. Yeah, I like to break sales leaders into two buckets. There are sales leaders that are very good at pipeline inspection, hiring a team, running a forecast call, very traditional sort of sales individuals. And based on the maturity of your company, you need those individuals. So you oftentimes need someone to just set up the basic sales process, how to forecast, how to run and qualify opportunities, how to actually understand how to qualify a deal. These are the sales basics, and those are traditional sales leaders. Typically, companies that are just getting started, let's say sub 20, 30 million in sales, they need sales leaders. If you're 30 million and beyond and you're trying to get to 300 million, let's say, you're going to start to approach where you need more what I would call a distribution leader. And a distribution leader is someone that understands a route to market. They understand how to allocate capital within that route to market to drive an efficient sales process. So they're a very different sort of lens on how they think about go-to-market. They're looking at the total addressable market and they're saying, all right, well, the best way to attack our SMB strategy is through a channel partner. Our best way to attack a mid-market, all right, is to have a direct sellers. Okay, well, in the enterprise, it might be going through 2 or 3, large SIs, or maybe the enterprise market, we really need to do a named account model, and we really need to have a very different sales motion. These are distribution leaders that are thinking more broadly than just a sales leader.
I see a level of synergy in certain aspects of the traits that you look out for in a seller and a leader. This premise of really having a strong why, something that's driving that person to want to go out there and achieve in some way. I noted your point around the chip on the shoulder and the potential contradiction with being empathetic. I would actually say that I feel like there's 2 types of chips on the shoulder, right? You can have one that I would describe as healthy in a way, which is where you've got something that you want to prove, whether it's to yourself or to the world, because that can actually be quite a powerful form of a motivation or some form of drive, depending on what that chip is and how it's helping you. And then there's unhealthy ones, right? Ones that, as you say, do conflict in some way with being empathetic or actually cannibalize that person's ability to go out there and be successful. So an interesting broader topic / debate to be had. I'd love to learn from you more about some of the core tenets or core ingredients that you feel should be staple to really any go-to-market plan. Are there specific again, tenets or principles that you feel any thriving GTM plan should absolutely include?
Well, I think there's probably, it's not necessarily a fundamental tenets. I think they are aspects or dimensions to a good go-to-market plan. And I think that there are probably 5, maybe 6 that I can think of right off the top of my head that I really think about when I'm coaching CROs or I'm coaching founders about how to think about their go-to-market. First, it's defining your sales motion. What is your sales motion? Is it a PLG motion plus enterprise? Is it just enterprise sales? Is it a channel sale? Like, you have to define that. The next is understanding your market. So how do you segment your market that you're going after? And once you do segment that market, enterprise, mid-market, and SMB, really understanding what the coverage model is against that market. And how are you going to cover that segment of the market that you're going after? Once you've done that, I think it's building a sales productivity model, understanding how fast do you have to hire, how long is it going to take to ramp, and how much, what's the model in which that you're seeing where people are going to attain quota. And then after you've got this kind of model, you've got this plan, you've got these dimensions, now we're trying to fine tune. Now we're saying, okay, can I use sales compensation as a lever? So defining a really good sales comp plan to drive the efficiency of the sales process. Building and making sure enablement is really strong, and understanding what that plays into your model. And so essentially your sales P&L is a better way to think about it. It's how do you allocate capital now within your own budget, within your own functions of your group of sales to drive these behaviors and actually make the model start producing. And lastly, it's probably just sitting down and really understanding the operational discipline that forces everyone to be a certain heartbeat of the organization.
I'd love for you to just talk a bit more about what it takes to really become a data-driven leader in everything that you do, and why you feel that that is so important as sales leaders continue to evolve their careers.
I think what has happened here is that the sellers have not kept pace oftentimes with the buyers. The buyers are actually quite sophisticated now in their approach. They understand the tooling and infrastructure oftentimes equally as well as the seller. And so they, with a PLG motion, they may have even used the tool more than the seller has. And so what does that really mean? I think that translates to, really having to be more solution oriented and understanding the actual value that you're bringing. And the only way to do that is through data in today's world. And you really do have to marry, when you're selling, you have to marry the ability to come to you as the buyer and say, look, I'm going to reduce your cost by X%, or I'm going to increase your productivity by Y%. And here's the reasons why I'm going to do that. At a very fundamental level, if you don't really understand those data elements, it's really hard to actually sell to today's buyer. So now we extrapolate that even further. As a leader, what does that mean? To me as the CRO, if I'm asking my sellers to be more sophisticated in their approach to selling, I equally as a leader and a manager need to be as data driven, because I got to create that culture in which that data is really important. So I like to make sure that I when I coach CEOs or CROs, is that we are marrying both the qualitative and the quantitative data elements at all times. So if we talk about a segment, we talk about what's the goal of the segment, what's the quota of the segment, what's the attainment of the segment, where do we need to go, what's the gap? Like, these are data elements that we need to just instill in ourselves and always repeat it to ourselves to make sure that we're driving. But we also need to not forget about what are the comments that we're hearing that are less qualitative or less quantitative and more quantitative in their approach, because I think the two of those things actually make us better sales leaders or better distribution leaders, because there are things that you just can't see in the numbers. And so I try to focus in on looking at the trend lines. I try to focus in on understanding the cohort data and looking for patterns. And then I usually will go back and say, if I see a pattern, I'll go back and try my best to now validate that with what I'm hearing in the street by the sellers. Are you hearing the same thing? I see this in the usage number. I see this in the renewal number. I see this in the churn number. But is this really true? And you want to get those anecdotes to help support those trend lines. Without that, it's really difficult as a leader in today's market, because, like I said, the buyers are just really quite advanced relative to where they were 10 or 15 years ago. They're just much more sophisticated. So you need to take much more of a data-driven approach when selling and managing teams at scale. There's been a couple instances of deals in which that I have learned the hard way, in which that I didn't really understand the economic model and the contract well enough, in which that I ended up putting the company in a difficult position. So without naming names of companies or specific deals, I think my biggest takeaway here is in order to be really great at your job, you need to understand the details. And when those details translate to contract value, you learn very quickly that, the clause, around how you're going to collect money and the credits they're going to get and the SLA credits and all of this stuff, when you look at it in totality, the deal may not be as great of a deal as you think. And I think sometimes in today's world, salespeople forget about that sort of broader view. And including myself, I've made the mistake a few times where I didn't quite understand that contractual clause about how are they going to get out of the contract.
I have one last question for you, Chaitan, which is really to understand from you what's the single best piece of advice that you would give to any sales leader that's listening right now to help them to up level in their career.
I think the best advice that I ever received, and I still follow to this day, is just be persistent. Persistent, honest, and humble. You just have to follow those three principles. Like you cannot be dishonest in your approach and how you approach a problem. With dishonest with yourself, but also with your team members or your managers. Like you just have to be transparent and honest at all times. And if you marry that with persistence and never giving up, that usually leads to a great outcome. And if you are humble in your approach in those two areas, it leads to great outcomes.
Many people will say sales is art and science, and I think that that's totally true. I think in the earlier days, it is very much about the art. That what is right? How do we approach this? Let's experiment very much, understand when we win, and take traits of that, but understand that you need a good sample size before you're ready to scale, before you actually know what works. So for me, it was a small team of myself included, a couple of account executives working on prospecting and finding new clients and trying to network with the lenders and doing everything that we could. And we were doing well. We had some big early wins, but it still didn't feel right. I felt that we could optimize better. So for us, with our high velocity deals that are kind of a high ACV, it was a big SDR team made sense. And it was kind of looking at the picture of what we had and saying, this could work, but really we should add some, some splashes of color on this corner of the painting, if you will, to get that group to be functioning as a whole. And so doing that, when people are working together, when everything's reaching efficiency, that's when you can start to realize the 1 + 1 = 3. And that's when you can start to get to the point of, this is the core team that we need. This is what peak efficiency is starting to look like. Here's where we can improve, and here's when we're going to be ready to scale. So trusting yourself as this is what a sale should look like for this company. At startups, you're typically the only company that's ever done that. Maybe not, but oftentimes that's the case. So it'll take a sense of intuition to figure out how to get there. Trusting that process of your creativity and your kind of gut is a great basis for getting, kicking things off.
I'm now thinking about the first hires that someone in your role would take on. So really the talent pipeline, some of the characteristics that are of critical importance for those first few hires, because you'd certainly expect that at each stage of growth, the DNA of the person that you require may evolve in some way or change in some way. So can you just talk to us about what are the key characteristics that you look for in those first few hires? And do you see that evolving as you start to move into new phases of the journey?
Absolutely. I think on the first hires, it's at a startup, it's the ambition, and that is what you most want to gauge. You don't have to ask for it in an interview. It should come across of this person's driven to do this. They come in with a deep sense of maybe not the technical aspect, but the goal of the company and what they're chasing after, and they're inspired by that. I think that's what I was. I think when I see that in people, I can accept a bit of ambiguity because I know that we are all marching in the same direction, trying to achieve a certain goal. I think the first hires are generally at the account executive level, as opposed to SDR or like enablement or customer success. And so on the account executive level, it's the ambition, it's the comfortability in an ambiguous commission structure, an ambiguous, we're not sure what marketing will be doing, and we're planning all of these things out. Being able to work together, to be patient, to put in a lot of hard work, and know that some things will work out and some things won't. But that the ambitious person tends to be able to sacrifice some of the comfortability of a consistent funnel of inbound leads, and they can forego that because they are embarking on a mission that they believe is right.
I'd love to understand for you, Chris, we work in high pressured worlds, right? Sales is not easy. It's high pace. It's definitely a marathon versus a sprint. Almost feels like sprinting a marathon at times. But I'd love to know how you go about staying healthy and energized throughout a typical working week. Are there any habits which have become a staple for you?
Of course. Well, sleep is the most important thing, but it's the hardest to sort of force, for me at least. So to do that, I prioritize exercise. It's been cold for so long in New Jersey, although the winter was somewhat mild. But making sure you're out there for the run or the gym session. And, I have a friend down the road that will send me a not so friendly text if he doesn't see me there in the morning, so that being able to ensure that you're taking care of yourself, you need to be behind the computer a lot, making sure that you're getting the sunlight is all very important to adding up to sleep and having the full day of productivity that you hope to have. Diet's relatively important for that. But it's also important to focus on things that can take your mind away. It's weekends, particularly when it's a regular weekend, we can call it. I'm keeping my phone down as much as possible, to the extent that I get curious, and you get the bug by Sunday afternoon of, I want to double check what's going on this week. I want to make sure that, we need to follow up with that client. I wonder what we'll write back to them on Monday morning. That gap, that break that you have in work is I think it's really important. Time away. The vacation time is put your phone down. I do not want to hear from you if you are out, on a beautiful vacation with, your fiance or your wife or something. Because you come back with that energy, that curiosity, that renewed kind of vision and focus that you had that got you excited for the job so many years ago whenever you started. So I think it's the weekly routines that you stick with, and it's the long-term staying focused, knowing when to step away, and having the ability to refresh whenever you're kind of winding down that break.
Why do you feel burnout is so high within our space? We see it certainly for sellers, even more prevalent with leaders. What's your stance on why that rate is as high as it is?
I've seen it very much, and I do believe, and I hope, that it's sort of on the wind down, because it was, when I call it 2014, so maybe not forever ago, but if you hire more account executives, you will make more money. That sort of logic was pervasive. And you might have founders and leaders be able to point to someone who did 250% of quota in a month into quarter and say, why can't everyone be like, Jane or John, whoever it was? Why can't they just do that? Well, Jane or John would be about done from an effort standpoint in 6 months' time. That's why you can't keep doing that. And so for me, for my team, and maybe a polarizing take I have is the account executive is the face of the company. They need to be refreshed, prepared, and excited to speak with every single client that they have. If you have a company where they're expecting the salesperson to be on 10 phone calls in the day on half-hour to half-hour blocks, they won't be taking notes. It's impossible to do all of that and your follow-up work. So I believe that do the most efficient work you can do on the account executive side, and then step away, and then relax. Take the time between your Tuesday to your Wednesday. I think that's really important. But to kind of better answer the question, I think the rationale of the more you hire, the more revenue is sort of fading away. I think those kind of immature notions of productivity and efficiency are being realized by the broader kind of technology community, which is where I've spent most of my time. And I think people are realizing how expensive it is to hire rather than to have patience and to train.
What is the single best piece of advice that you'd give to anyone that's listening to help them to up level in their career?
Yes. I would say in terms of leveling up is the most important thing is to understand who and what is influencing the decisions that you make. For me, I looked at folks that when you fully start paying attention to you're working and you're making a living, where do you want to go? What is the end game? That's when I really started paying attention and seeing people be successful at selling a startup, being an investor, who started out in my shoes and ended up somewhere I really wanted to go. I mentioned Mark Roberge earlier. You see folks at, there's I think he's at Stage 2 Capital. You see GTM Fund, all these groups starting up. There's Sam Blond at Founders Fund now. That story is, for me, the most appealing. So I said to myself, well, investing in technology is probably never going to get old. How do you kind of get to the end game there and figure out what are the steps that you'll need to take? And once you do that, who are you going to get the advice from to level yourself up along the way? If you're an SDR today and you're looking at how to become an account executive, don't take advice from the SDR sitting next to you. Take advice from the account executive that's leading the board. If you are on the account executive side and you want to be a VP of sales one day, take advice from the VP of sales. Don't take advice from the manager or someone. Don't follow the footsteps of someone that went to a place that you didn't want to go. That for me is most important. So like structure how you get to where you want to go and then figure out step by step, what do I need to do to cross each threshold and hopefully get to where I want to go.
I love when people are passionate about what they do, because when you have passion, it's really like having an infinite fuel source, you know, and we talk so often about burnout within our space and challenge. And I think one of the contributing factors is sometimes when you're just turning up to do your job because it's your job. You know, when you speak there about that passion for helping customers solve great outcomes, or as a leader, just being really bought into helping your team achieve their personal and professional goals, this is fuel, you know, and you get up every day and it really helps you to have that bit between your teeth to go out there and make a difference. So now I'm no longer surprised as to why you've been doing this as long as you have been.
No, it's well
I'm sure
said.
Much more to come.
No, well said. I think that you're absolutely right. Whether it's your customers, whether it's your team, these stories and the impact that you have, and I could say all the same things about my teams over the years too, right? I have so many people that I hired 12 plus years ago that are now, you know, C-suite VPs of companies and love hearing the success that they've had just as much as these companies. And that's what motivates me, right? It's not just, hey, here's a paycheck or do your job just because you're supposed to do your job. It's these other outside factors that really motivate me. And it's like, you know what, I would almost to a certain extent, I almost would do it for free, right? And I feel like I've been able to, it seems like similar to what you're doing, you know, with this program, et cetera, but I love helping so many people out along the way and don't ask for retainers or monthly, you know, stipends, things like that. People helped me early in my career with all different types of things. I told you I had almost no experience in this world. I read a lot of books, but I also got a lot of people to help me just because they wanted to. And I feel like I've always tried to pay that forward, and we'll do the same thing for people. So, yeah, definitely motivating.
I love it. I'm glad we share that spirit. Now, Josh, I want to transition slightly into some more tactical things. I think our listeners love to, get into the brain of someone like yourself and learn a bit more about how you've been able to build and sustain go-to-market operations that have taken you to, north of that $35 million mark multiple times over. So please just talk to us about some of the core pillars that have really underpinned the building and the sustaining and really scaling best-in-class sales teams and broader go-to-market operations.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the first one is hiring the right people, right? You can only do so much yourself, and you really want to make sure you have the right people around you. And obviously why I'm in this space now and very passionate about being able to bring in the right people, who's the right stage, who's the right employee for hire number 10 versus hire number 200 versus hire 1,000. I think those really vary. I look not just for skill and obviously the attitude. I think those things are givens, but certain core behaviors, especially in early stage companies, you're always thinking about people that can, learn fast, they have the right effort, but also, have the right tenacity, have the right, process improvement mentality of never settling for status quo, really thinking analytical, being accountable, managing up, I think is a core aspect. From there, it's all about training, right? Not just onboarding, but the ongoing training, and how are you bringing in training on a regular basis. And for me, what I've seen is you, and I'm sure so many other people have seen it, is you move fast. What you might be doing this week is different than next week or the week after. How do you make sure your entire team is on board, understanding the process, so they're not leaving anyone behind? I think challenging the status quo is something that I always make sure is key with the people that I work with. And it's okay to make mistakes, all right? And I think everyone strives for perfection, sometimes too nervous to go outside these guardrails of your role. And I think I love supporting and bringing in the right type of culture and that pillar of building. Hey, there is no straight line. Let's think about this together and be able to leverage the right way to go about it.
I found it's incredibly important as a leader to really take the time to work through your own leadership principles. So who you are as a leader, what you stand for, your expectations, and start to get people rallied around that. I've seen a mistake, I would say, from a number of first-time leaders, certainly, where they kind of go into roles and try and just figure things out as they go. And when you haven't taken that time to work through what's your mission, what's your vision, what are your set of standards, your principles, it makes it quite hard to shape and define culture, because you don't really have an identity because you haven't figured it out yourself. So I'd also encourage anyone who's listening to also take some time to really, really establish your own set of core principles, and then leverage that alongside some of the tips that Josh has mentioned to really come 360 to build and sustain culture, especially as your company continues to grow and scale over time. Now, Josh, I'd love us to move forward into the next segment where we talk a bit more about operational excellence as I describe it. So love to learn more about really how you set up your week for success.
I'm very, very structured when it comes to my calendar, the way we think about it, our team meetings, our exec meetings. And for me, it starts usually Sunday night. You can do it Friday at the end of the week, whenever you want. But for me, it's always a Sunday night, and it's kind of a time to process what my week looks like ahead, right? And I look at my calendar, and sure, I have all my ducks in a row. My schedule is tight and set up for success. I'm prepared for team meetings I'm running. I'm prepared for the exec meetings I'm in. Is it a board meeting? I'm prepared for all my one-on-ones. I'm prepared really for everything. I know that my focus is going to be this week and structured in. And reason being is, in addition to the things that come up, I can always add on to what's already established from Sunday night, right? To your point, is there a piece of item that I want to add to a one-on-one on a team leader's perspective or on the IC perspective? I can add it directly there. It becomes really easy to continue down that rather than just starting from scratch middle of the way. And I think the key is, when you're asking the question, just like, how do you set your week up for success? It's got to be organized. It's got to be structured in the standpoint of like, hey, when do I have my one-on-ones? Is that at the beginning of the week? Is that at the end of the week? When do I have my team meetings? When is it best, right? And it's not just always, hey, I've always done team meetings Mondays, so let's do Monday. Right? What makes sense for the business, the stage that you're at, what works, right? And continue to get feedback from people. And I think it's really crucial to set it up. But that being said, one of the things that I still do to this day on a weekly basis is I actually set out time buckets in the standpoint of the week, and put this in basically to a pie chart at the beginning of the week. I'm going to spend 30% of my time on, team meetings. I'm going to spend 20% of my time on X, and, 5% of my time on heads down working on this thing. And really every week, the following Sunday, I look back and I evaluate, was I on track or was I not? And if I wasn't, why not? Or was that okay? Things happen so quickly and change so often that it's okay if, you have to throw away something for the day to get something done, right? A multi-million-dollar deal comes up, all hands on deck, let's work on this together. But that being said, you still got to come to the point of being able to reflect on it in the week. And at the end of the week, if you didn't have the changes that you expected, and you not feel like you didn't get what you need to get done, you got to make some changes.
Last few questions for you,
Yeah.
Josh. In our last segment here, I like to call it the close. It's really just to unpack a bit more about some of the principles that you have or thoughts, whether they're frameworks, qualification, criteria, whatever, as it relates to just core principles around winning business. Talk to us about some of the things that have underpinned your career or your teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one is KYC, right? Know your customer. I think that's number one. That includes the company, the buyer, everyone involved in the deal. Be, to a T perfect when it comes to everything that makes them tick, right? In the end, we continue to live in a, continue to AI world, tech world. Things are only getting even more advanced when it comes to that. In the end, still to this day, people oftentimes, mostly not, are going to buy from people. You got to have everything else, but in the end, you being a person, you being relatable, you being able to solve their pain points and their challenges, and being able to truly understand what that looks like is number one, right? I can have somebody, AI write the greatest 1-minute speech of all time. In the end, I gotta have, what are the right questions for me to truly understand how you tick, how you operate, how you work, how we can solve this problem and go from there. So I think that's the number one thing when you ask about, so thinking about how to win business and how to scale, you gotta know the customer and understand how that works, and then understand how your team can help and support, right? And I think especially as you go maybe up market, bigger segments, bigger deals, longer sales cycles, you gotta have who is everyone on their team, who is everyone on your team, and I tell my team, like, you're the, whatever analogy you want to think of, I'll take the sports analogy of, like, you're the offensive coordinator or the coach or whatever it may be. You're telling who's the quarterback, who's the running back, who's the receiver on your team, right? I want customer success to come in and do this. I want this from my ops team. I want this from you are the conductor of how this process is going to work A through Z. And in the end, if you can control that and help make sure that your customer understands it all the way through, you're setting a pretty good journey to make sure that they go, hey, you know what? This person gets me. I like this person. I like what they do. I can bet on them. I could be successful with it. I'm going to continue on. So in the end, I think you can never worry about, there's so many things in your head. Can I just know my customer, know everything about him?
So I'd love to hear from you, Josh, what your single best piece of advice would be to any sales leader that's out there right now that wants to up level in their career.
There's so much, right? There's so many things that I could think about. I mean, everything's going through my head of people giving me advice. I think I'll answer it in two ways. The first part is, like, are you in the right position, in the right stage, in the right aspect? And I'll quote Steve Jobs again. He said something like, if today were your last day, is what you're doing today, are you happy with what you're doing today? And he said, whenever the answer had been no for not one day, of course, but several days in a row, he needed to make a change. And I think that was something that's always stuck with me. It's not as big as, oh my God, I need to quit and go find another job, or I need another career. It's just, what is that small change that I can tweak? And why am I not happy about today, right? What is not going right? And I think that's the reflection. So often you get an autopilot and just go through the days and incrementally get more frustrated or get more, disappointed about what's going on, or reset and think about why. The specific best advice for anyone up leveling their career is still to this day, it's funny. One of the first leaders, CEOs that I worked for said, like, the best way to grow in your career is solve my problems, right? And I'm glad that you're doing your job, but the way that you think about the way that you get promoted is think about what my 3 or 4 biggest priorities are and solve those, whether that's in tandem with what you're doing, in addition to what you're doing. If you are solving your boss's problems, that's how you continue to up-level your career, and you scale and you grow in what you're doing. You get promoted, you get additional things. It's too easy, again, to get those blinders on and say, look, I'm only focused in on closing X deal or X this. No, like what is your boss's priorities, your manager's priorities, and let me make sure I'm solving those. And I know that's the way that you continue to grow in your career. Continue to think about it a little bit outside of your wheelhouse. Start thinking about that information to the point of getting feedback from your boss. You'll start understanding why they're giving you feedback. I understand where he or she's priorities are, so now I understand why he's giving me this feedback. All those things. So the best advice I ever got was think about it that way. You'll end up being very successful in your career.
I do want to spend some time now and shift gears on the pipeline generation side of the house.
Sure.
It sounds like you had to, be right in the trenches doing a commission only role. So tell us a bit more about that experience and some of the key principles that you found to be incredibly important when it comes to pipe generation.
Yeah, at that point, it was really interesting because I was selling both B2B and B2C. So it was a really interesting dynamic. And what I learned was, quite frankly, how to communicate with people and the different modes of communication. So both kind of understanding how you're discussing and how you process the conversation and how you're thinking about my approach to what I'm offering. And I was really intentional about going through that and what it actually meant. And you combine that with scientifically sort of backing into the numbers and where I needed to get to based on projections, et cetera. I built out a plan. It's kind of that sort of art and science that I know a lot of people talk about when we talk about sales, and you can apply that to building out pipeline, right? There is science and numbers behind what it takes to actually build out pipeline, but you also, you need to get in the conversation and be real and be empathetic with people to actually build pipeline that is genuine and sustainable.
You've spoken a lot about the importance of communication, and it's also something that I hear a ton is one of the biggest challenges for other CROs or other people in a similar role to yourself. So I'd love to know if there's any tactical things that you've been able to do or implement to really help to bridge that communication gap, especially in scenarios where many other leaders have a real challenge with that.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's the technology communication channels that are out there, the Slacks of the world, Teams, et cetera, where it can streamline sort of different channels of communications or different types of communications. But I actually, I think sometimes, depending on the role, it can come down to explaining to somebody how you like to receive information, right? Because then you can literally have, when those interactions happen, they can be a lot crisper, more concise, and more efficient, right? So as an example, so I'm relatively new to the business here, and with my direct team, I made it pretty clear how I like to receive information, and that's sort of tell me what's happening and then give me the details following, as opposed to the opposite, right? Where I don't need this long story first. I want you to get to it so I can then process, right? Not everybody thinks like that, though. So it's really critical when you're talking to different folks in the business, how they like to and actually receive or send information. And I think getting to that level can often help a lot of the downstream communication strategies and plans that people have. And, I think not enough people spend enough time doing that. I've worked at several organizations that have gone through sort of those communication discovery exercises that people have, where you literally have the blocks on your desk to talk about how people communicate and what their methods are. And, I pay attention to that. And I think it matters when you're talking to communication. So from a tactical perspective, that's actually one area that I think is important. So I think implementing multiple different means to get there is one of the pieces that I try to implement to make sure that it is scalable, because after that sort of table has been set, so to speak, it becomes a launching pad for scalability.
Yeah, that vision piece is really important. I've certainly found that when you create a grand vision that really energizes people, it helps to create groundswell around a unified way of going to market, a unified way of communicating, thinking, operating. And as much as it's important to have diversity of thought, you still need something that unifies people. And a great vision that's well thought through, that energizes people, is a really great way to do that. For you, beyond the coffee in the morning, is there anything else that helps to keep you going?
So I think I'll categorize it into two different compartments here, right? One is the physical, right? So I think exercise is obviously important from a stress reduction perspective or just clarity. I'll sometimes go for a run at lunchtime, right? I'll take my lunch break and I'll go for a run. And some folks will say, well, how do you have time for that? I find running I think a lot while I run, and I brainstorm and I come up with ideas while I'm running, probably to get me think about not the fact that I'm running and don't want to be, right? But it becomes actually a really productive session for me to get through, and also naturally provides a physical benefit from a health perspective. But I'm a lifelong learner. I love listening to podcasts, reading books, reading articles or watching webinars from other thought leaders around the industry. I really feed off of that sort of critical thinking component, probably stemming back from my philosophy background. But that's actually what gives me a lot of energy to think about how I'm going to attack the business, and combining that with my sort of sense of general curiosity around things. I find a level of sort of energy, if you will, and passion for what I do, and I feed off a lot of others, and hearing that discussion and that debate and dialogue, et cetera. So that's the sort of other side of the coin for how I find myself energized for what I do.
So all of the above plus a coffee in the morning, and you're good to go. Note taken.
One of the things I like to implement when we're talking about deals and moving them through a cycle is quite frankly talking about why a customer is not going to buy from you. Like sales reps and individual contributors have a tendency to list out all the reasons why they're buying and prove the ROI to that point, but oftentimes don't ask, okay, that's great, but why wouldn't they buy? Right? What are you missing? What are you not thinking about? So almost thinking about it from their lens a little bit more, and that perspective can help either shorten the cycle or maybe answer questions that they haven't fully told you what all the questions are. Getting to really think about the deal from a more holistic perspective, where hopefully eliminates a lot of the rosy glasses that people can sometimes get when we're moving deals along, even late stage deals.
Bill, we've got to get your perspective on hiring the best talent. I'd love to just spend a few minutes just talking about some of the key principles behind your hiring criteria. What do you tend to look out for and why?
I'm a lifelong learner, and I love trying to find other people who are in that bucket, whether they're genuinely curious or they're taking extracurricular classes or reading lots of books, trying to expand their knowledge base, because it's typically applied to the customer conversations when people are inherently like that. That's a really difficult thing to coach somebody to be more curious, to be more learned, right? And so I think it's one of those key elements that you really look to try and find in people, because I do believe it's going to really bring something to the table from a customer perspective that is just one of those intangibles. In addition to that, I know, I love, sometimes you got to get scrappy, and being gritty is a really important skill set to have, right? And so whether you want to sort of combination, call it like resourcefulness or being stick-to-itiveness, right? However you want to describe grit, that ability to keep going and persevere through things, is something that I particularly look for, and I think it's important trait to have in the sales profession specifically. I mean, there's nothing easy about sales, and you really need to have it to keep that going. Like I know salespeople can make a lot of money, and that's a big driving force for others, but that's not it, right? You got to have something else driving you for it. And so having that innate sense of determination, those are two big components. I also am naturally, given all the coaching and development sort of conversations, coachability is something that is huge for me. It's very tough to have somebody who's stuck in their ways and really narrow with their vision of how they've done things in the past. I'm a big proponent of failing, because it means you're reaching beyond what your comfort is. It means you're trying new things, and that's okay. So I look for that in people who are comfortable being uncomfortable sometimes. And so those are kind of, some of the core tenets of a person. I think skill sets and experience relative to sales practice is always important, but some of those can be taught. So depending on the circumstances of the situation, those are sometimes even secondary, right? Because the overall attitude has got to be up there, and that the approach to business.
What is the single best piece of advice that you have out there to any sales leader that's listening that wants to up level in their career?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, and I don't. It's tough because is there one singular? I don't know, right? It's tough. I think going back to, if I can sum it all up, just be curious, right? really go out there, own it, and try to explore and expand. Right. That's part of my growing, constantly learning mentality. Just try and understand and be curious and really own it. And I think a lot of good things will happen regardless of what your path may be, if that's the approach that you can take with life. And it's what I've done. I've certainly made my mistakes, but it's one thing I can help. I think people can help, move on in their careers if they approach life like that.
Just walk us through how you've gone about actually choosing the right type of companies that have a product, service, and solution that the market actually has appetite for.
Yeah, well, I guess my initial response would be I didn't always make good choices. I think you make choices with the best information you have, and selling is really interesting because you never have 100% of the information. You really can't make always make the best decision. You've got to make decision oftentimes with a severe lack of information, but you've got to, timing it requires you to make a decision sometimes before you want to. And I've gone to companies where it has been challenging, and I feel the thing that's gratifying about my career at this point is oftentimes I'm coming into companies and being asked to come into companies to help them get to the point where they have the compelling solution and the story and the positioning that makes a company really, interested in them. And they're going and approaching those companies in an interesting way. A good example is a company I'm with now, Gentrio, very small startup. I'm acting CRO for them. And, when I first got here, they were looking at various ways to try to sell an estate planning solution. And the reality is estate planning is not something people love to do. It's hard conversations they have to have with family and loved ones. And for us as a small company to try to sell a product direct to consumers was going to be really challenging. And so when we looked at all the different ways in which we could sell this, primarily through channel partners and referral partners, we realized we couldn't sell this as its own thing. We have to make it part of and a compelling part of. And just this morning we had a great call with a financial institution who was trying to figure out how to make the advisor more central to their clients' lives. And they're looking at trying to build a portfolio of tools that the advisor can use to help people, not just with financial planning, but with life planning. And so we found a way to make estate planning very relevant to that conversation and to that company, not for the value of estate planning in and of itself, but the ability for that to be a tool to add to a toolkit that advisor can then use to have a more enhanced and sticky conversation and relationship, with those people who primarily came to them maybe to manage an IRA or, a small investment account. They're now in a position to be able to grow that to a strategic relationship. So, it's not just the company and the product and the customer and their interest. It's crafting the message and then finding the right places where you have channels that are incented and see value in adding that to their portfolio and driving that out to the customer, is a much bigger value proposition.
Now, being able to take a message out to the market starts with hiring great talent. And you've had experience both in the startup ecosystem as well as with large enterprises. You mentioned the likes of Oracle. So, Jim, just walk us through some of your core principles around hiring criteria and any differences or nuances that you've seen in hiring great talent in a startup versus hiring great talent in an established organization.
Yeah, there's, as you'd said to me earlier, there's a lot to unpack there. Certainly. And one of the things I think I've found is it's not always easy to transition. I've been fortunate because of the roles I've had and the people I know and relationships I've had to be able to do some of this transition between big companies and smaller companies. But bigger companies often act differently, and the kinds of sellers you want to hire in that environment oftentimes are different than those you're going to want to bring into, let's say, a startup organization. Primarily, you want to find people, and I think at smaller companies, you're going to want to find people who are much more willing to work independently, fail a lot more quickly, have a super positive, go get 'em attitude, and know they have to do a lot of things themselves, a lot of heavy lifting themselves. They might not have completed collateral. They might not have a really strong marketing engine that's bringing inbound leads. They might have to do more cold calling. They've got to kind of put their their boots on and trudge through a lot of unfinished pieces in the sales process and a selling model that a lot of people who are used to maybe being a strategic account executive or working on larger, more strategic deals, it's a hard transition when you typically have a team. When I was at Oracle as a global account manager, I had 14 people on my Oracle, on my my Seagate account, to manage that global relationship. And I had a lot of administrative support. So it was a very different kind of environment than this, hey, you're on your own, good luck, here's a Salesforce login and some base collateral, and, we'll see if we can get some engineers to to jump in and help you with technical discussions and demos. You've got to really be very entrepreneurial in that scenario versus the other. I don't know how many, people are born sellers. I think you hear that comment sometimes. I think people are born with the attributes that could make them into good sellers, things like enthusiasm, self-confidence, but not cockiness, the willingness to get knocked down over and over and over again. And, you stand up, you brush yourself off, you look and say, what can I take from this to learn, to maybe avoid that next time, and the commitment to get better. Those general kinds of attributes, I think, are really, great ones for selling. But as far as the ones I actually stated, deliver results is basically, your end results, which are your track record, which is, is always going to start at best choppy. You may, get lucky and be in the right place at the right time and get the right territory and be successful. But, over time, over 5, 10, 12 years of selling, that's going to even out, and your results over that period of time should build, and you'll learn from that and get better at it. So that's kind of a learned skill. I think the customer obsession, again, that's that passion and excitement to want to understand, naturally curious about what the customer is trying to do, more so almost than your own solution, right? A lot of times we get so caught up trying to pitch our features and our benefits, we're not listening enough to really love and understand the customer's problem, and then speaking to those problems and the solutions to those problems and how your products are going to solve them, right? And so having a natural curiosity to want to understand the needs of others is a sort of a foundation underneath that. The one in the middle, though, which is, sorry, it's I lost my train of thought here. So customer obsession,
bias for action.
And bias for action is the other one I mentioned, and I think that is something you probably are going to be bored. You don't want to be patient. You don't want to be, a good engineer is not often a good salesperson, because they're going to want to do all the detailed investigation and get it so it's 100% perfect. It's never going to break. It's always going to work. I need to make sure. That's why I love, one of my favorite things I do now is I'm doing some work in the area of work with startups. You mentioned MIT and the venture mentoring service. It's a whole lot of fun because you have all these technical people who are trying to sell, and they're waiting for the perfect situation, right? And you can't do that. You have to have bias for action. You have to say, is this close? Yeah. It's not what I envision the product to be for the next, 3 years. But, if this gets me 6 months further and I can solve this person's near-term problem, but it's not going to be quite the development path I was going to take, that's okay. To be able to be action-oriented, said, I need to get to the next step with this customer, or I need to, disengage, right? Because if you're not going to be able to accommodate and bend to their needs to some degree, you might as well go look somewhere else. There's signs you can see of someone who's got some attributes and maybe people skills to take on leadership role, having direct reports, and then working on, how do I build a process that's scalable so we can bring on more people and build that team up.
You may have noticed, Jim, I have a picture behind me, which is of Muhammad Ali. I'm a massive combat sports fan. And some people liken our careers to athletes, right? And sports people, because they say you kind of got to get in, make your money and get out, because it takes so much out of you as an individual because of the pressures, the demands, the consistency of targets and beyond. And here you are 25 years deep still a current day operator. What's the secret? How have you sustained over such an extended period of time?
It's two things. One is I actually enjoy what I do. I enjoy the challenge and the process. And I think I've learned not to let it get to me, right? So I think of the things that are the positives, like having engagement with customers, developing a relationship, earning their trust, and really working on, making their jobs, their careers, their companies move forward with what you can offer and what you can do. And frankly, if we can't do that in some way, or we can't see it leading to that in some way, it's hard to make a case for a big deal. And as you probably know, and everybody who's been in tech sales in particular, there's a lot of big deals that happen that no one gets any value whatsoever out of. And it's all because of the marketing or the hype, or, look at AI right now. And don't get me wrong, there's some great AI capabilities out there and great solutions, but there's also a lot of AI that was, sold, that people spent a lot of money on, that just never had any chance of being successful. And it was more because, hey, I want to say my company's committed to AI, and we invested $3 million in whatever. And I've done those kinds of deals, but for me, it's more about the excitement of going in and say, hey, we can actually impact these companies and these organizations and how make their lives better, and then feel the pressure, understand the need, understand the end of quarter, craziness, and communication management that you have to do up your chain to your senior leadership to help set expectations and do things, but not let it get to you. I mean, I remember early in my career, my wife waking me up out of my sleep because I'm sitting up in the bed having a conversation with the CFO of Oracle on why we didn't close a deal that I was trying to close at the end of that quarter, like complete stress overload. And I can compartmentalize that now, and I can leave that at the office and come home. But it doesn't mean I'm less worried about it. I'm going to spend less time on it. I've just learned how to manage and cope with that as well. I think the burnout happens when you let that stay in you and fester in you, and that can have a real detrimental effect on your health and your aging and everything else, over time, if you let it.
If you're talking now out there to that first-time sales leader who's just gotten their promotion, they're looking at the year ahead, they're excited but daunted, right, by the reality that they've got a big target, a new team. What tactical advice would you give to that sales leader to try and help them fast-track where you are already mentally?
Yeah, I think... especially if it's someone new, if they're being promoted in my organization, I'm going to make sure they know they're going to be given a little bit of leeway and a little bit of, understanding, like, you're commit to a number in a quarter or, performance things. We're going to give you a little bit of leeway, and I'm going to make sure they know that and say, take advantage of that. And, the best thing you can do is be honest with, get your team, and those resources you have selling, get them to be honest with you. Get to the truth, right? And don't sugarcoat. And I've seen most sales organizations flail and struggle mightily because the salesperson, the hunter out in the field, is painting a rosy picture to their manager, and their manager is now adding their rosy picture to it. And by the time it gets somewhere else, it's nothing like the deal that's actually going on there in the field. It's completely fabricated, right? So number one is make sure you have a really good, honest, and critical understanding of what you really have in front of you, right? And then from that, if you have a good meeting, it doesn't mean the deal closed. You had a good meeting, and the worst is, hey, I had a great meeting. I said, great, what's the next step? Oh, I didn't ask. We had a shitty meeting. So you had a bad meeting. But get people to be on, get your people, now that you're managing, get their trust and get them. You want bad news early. You want honest information. And when there is a deal that's going, you want to be able to communicate that up so that people get genuinely excited about the deals that are real. And now you have the ability to get, the resources of the company around those ones that really matter. That's one of the fundamental things, to be accurately understand what's really going on in your team and the patch, right? To be able to, and then be able to effectively communicate that to leadership.
As you look back and reflect over the past 25 years with the foresight and the wisdom that you have now, If you could go back, would you have done anything differently?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, there's certainly lots of deals and maybe a few startup companies that didn't pan out the way I'd wanted them. I think that for me, and it's more personal, I wish I'd done more international work sooner. I'd always had a desire and an interest in doing things, and really myself, getting immersed in different cultures and different societies and different, ways of life and different business models outside of the U.S. And I did some of that. I did some early in my career when I was a software engineer. And then I did some, obviously I had a great opportunity with Amazon when we started a business here in the U.S. It was very successful after 2 years. And my boss, who was running the division at the time, came to me and said, okay, let's sit down. I just really wish I had done it sooner. And it's amazing the perspective you get, and a worldview you get that you don't have if you don't go live somewhere else. You don't go, immerse yourself in other cultures. And it brings you back here, I think, with a better perspective. And I feel like I'm a better seller, I'm a better manager now because of that.
What is the single best piece of advice that you'd give to any sales leader that's listening right now to help them to up level in their career?
That's a good question. I've got 6 or 7 of them that I'm mulling around in my head. I would say, don't be afraid of the risk. And I think, especially in the sense of, picking how do I endear myself to my leadership, versus what's the real deal, right? I think we all get to a point in our career where we have enough experience. We know you can look and say, I know what needs to happen here, right? And yet, you're tentative, or you're unable because of whether it's going to disrupt someone else's job, or it's going to maybe change the strategy or put something at risk or whatever. Don't be afraid to put it out there. And again, a lot of that came back from my experience at Amazon, which is, one of their biggest mantra, one of these 14 leadership principles is disagree and commit, right? If you disagree and you're in the shipping dock, you can be in the room with the CEO and disagree on something. And if you've got the data and the logic and the understanding to support it, and people look at it pragmatically, you have an opportunity to make a good positive change. Don't shy away from it in place of placating someone else, or, just following the strategy without really objecting to it if you really feel strongly about something.